My name's Meikle, and welcome to this festive edition of Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. I've picked 5 excerpts from recent episodes that I hope you'll enjoy during this festive period. So without further ado, let's get into the first one. In this excerpt, I have a great conversation with John Cornwell, who's an amazing commercial negotiator and commercial leader. And we have a discussion around the difference between demands and interests and why they're important during your negotiations. So over to John. I've always thought, and obviously the books tell you the same thing, which is interests are the kind of the motivations that sit behind someone's demands. Because I say to people, find out what their interests are. And they're like, what do you mean? Do you mean what they do in their kind of like away from work time? I'm like, no. What's driving them to make the demands they're making? Is that what you find as well?
Yes, but I think you use a really interesting word there in terms of demands, because demands and interests aren't necessarily the same thing.
Correct.
And if we're not careful in a negotiation and we just hear the demands, you're not necessarily getting beneath that to understand, okay, what really are the interests? What are we genuinely trying to solve here?
Correct.
And it's only through getting to that question, or at least the answer to that question, that I think you can really move not just the negotiation forward, but in that direction where you start to find resolutions that work for both parties. If you focus on demands, the chances are it's going to be a little bit more win-lose in terms of the style of an approach, and that clearly isn't a great way to take or handle a negotiation. So I think we really have to be careful. Demands, particularly if you're dealing with procurement will have a certain style and they'll make certain demands. But to your point, behind that there will be, and sometimes it might be obvious, but often it's not. Okay, what is the business problem, or what is it from this negotiation that the client really wants? And that isn't necessarily the same as what they're demanding.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think over my years of experience, probably yours, John, as well, that becomes one of the key things in creating success in the negotiation and unlocking an awful lot of value and taking the heat out of the moment as well, is getting behind what are your real interests? What's going on here?
I completely agree. And back to where we started in terms of emotion, it's a nice way of taking that emotion out of the room.
Yeah.
I mean, funny enough, talking about emotion, Mike, I'll share a very brief example with you, but just for listeners in terms of where it can be a tactic. So we were negotiating with a client that we knew very well, one of our larger relationships. We would have typically annual negotiations, but there would be things that might come up during the year, which would need resolving and so on. So we knew one another well, both parties, a lot of respect. They were tough, but generally fair clients. And on this particular occasion, it wasn't just that it got emotional so quickly. It was hard to understand quite what had driven it to that point so soon in the discussions. What's more, what we had, let's say, tabled to move the negotiation forward, I knew was really reasonable. So I was a bit lost as to what was going on. And in this particular situation, there were 2 new clients in the room. When I say new, we knew the clients, but they weren't typically involved in the negotiation. So anyway, the emotions get high very, very quickly. Next thing, I kid you not, papers, books from across the side of the table thrown at me and the team. The client, who I know very well, stands up and walks out the room, slams the door. So, okay, that's a good time to take the time out.
Sounds like it, yes.
We reconvened. Anyway, the reason I share that is later, once we'd got past the negotiation, the next time I saw this client, they explained to me that the pressure that they were under to demonstrate. So the other clients in the room were from another part of their network who felt that the global clients managing the agency relationships weren't looking after their interests. And so this was designed. So we obviously, you could be forgiven for thinking that was a tactic to unsettle the agency,
yes,
to put us on the back foot. Actually, it wasn't at all. They were trying to show the clients in the room that they did have their best interests at heart and they were really pushing the agencies as far as they possibly could. Now, we can debate whether that's the right way to do it, but that was the reason for the emotion that escalated very quickly and the reaction. So it had nothing to do with us whatsoever. So it's very easy to, as I say, you need to deal with the emotion, but sometimes it's not always what it seems, if that makes sense.
In this excerpt, I talked to Meikle, a great friend of mine, all about investment, risk, cost and deliverables. What's the difference and why is it important? So, David, over to you. So we did have a pre-call and we kind of agreed on 3 broad questions. So let's start with kind of like the first one, which is talking about investment and risk as opposed to cost and deliverables when you're in that kind of triangle of doom. What do you mean by that and why is it important?
So the agency world does itself a massive disservice every time it produces something called a cost estimate for a client, because it speaks the language of cost, and a cost is something which is undesirable. A cost is much more appropriate for a distress purchase, like the cost of a gas bill or the cost of an electricity bill or the cost of council tax. If we didn't have to pay them, we wouldn't want to pay them. But there isn't a single aspect of marketing, down to the floor space that a marketing department occupies, that doesn't need to be calculated in what is a overall marketing return on investment. It's not a return on cost, it's a return on investment. And I think that whenever we're talking about costs, particularly with procurement, costs are zeroed in on as, well, that's something therefore that I want to attack, not something that I therefore want to maximize. And you end up automatically in a conversation about cost reduction rather than investment maximization. But the other important part of this, and again, particularly in the context of procurement, is that many agencies will have experienced procurement in the context of trying to reduce costs, or as we're now going to call them going forward, trying to reduce investments. But they are often unaware that the other part of the procurement role is the mitigation of risk.
Exactly.
And this is particularly important when it comes to investments, because marketing investments are like any other investment. It's like your pension fund investments. It makes no difference which investment you're talking about. If you want to have a higher return from a lower investment, then you have to increase your risk. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll get it because you've increased your risk. But there isn't a way of getting a predictable higher return without there being a higher degree of risk and therefore unpredictability. Those dynamics exist in marketing as they exist anywhere else. And it's sometimes helpful to go to the extremes of a scale so that you can kind of illustrate that. So, for example, if you were launching a new brand, so let's take Barbie as a great example, right? The Barbie movie is a terrific example. The spend on the Barbie movie in marketing was greater than the cost of the production of the film.
Wow.
This was an effort to make sure that people would go and see this film at the cinema from the get-go in very, very, very large numbers. And it was incredibly effective. But there wasn't a, let's not do that, it looks a bit pricey. It was a, what else can we do? What else can we do? What else can we do? So they absolutely maximized investment because of the surety of a return. You go so far that there's no way people aren't going to respond to this. Now, imagine that they'd spent half. What would have been the risk of the box office being less successful? Imagine they'd spend a quarter. And each time you reduce that, you can see that the risk of the critical mass of excitement not happening is clear. And any other marketing campaign works exactly the same way. So if you're investing little, either expect a little return, or go for maximum, or go for high calculated risk. But that's not a conversation that agencies and clients have because we don't like to use the R word. But the reality is,
we don't. No, you're right.
The reality, Peter Drucker said all profit is derived by risk, because you're transforming what it is that you have in an asset of money into commodities that you then manufacture into goods in the hope that you'll be able to sell them. But you have the hope that you'll be able to sell them. It's in the future, much like any marketing campaign is in the future. There'll be a number of marketers who know that you can't confirm what the future is going to be from 2019. If ever we should be more attuned to having a conversation about risk, it's now. But it's not a conversation that we have. And we can have that conversation in the context of, well, it's an investment. So, yes, you can reduce our fees if you want to, but you'll be reducing our hours. And if you reduce our hours, you reduce the time that we spend finding an optimal strategy. You reduce the time that we spend developing a creative idea. You reduce the time that we spend executing that creative idea to the best of our ability. And if you're capping all of those, then you're responsible for the risk that they create. If we are determining what is an optimal spend in those areas, i.e. a point before diminishing return on an investment, at what point, if we say this is how much we need for strategy, this is how much we need for creative, this is how much we need for execution, then your ability is to say, so you can do that and you can be confident of our return. In which case you've given the responsibility to the agency and you've given the agency the circumstances that they asked for to deliver it. So there's a whole thing in there about my latest theme that you might have noticed I just woven in there, Mike, which is about responsibility.
I was going to say, very clever that you wrote. Exactly, correct. Your new book, precisely. David, why don't you talk about your new book for a second?
Available exclusively
Available all good sellers.
Available exclusively from tuningup.co.uk, but also you can find paperback versions and Kindle versions from your Jeff Bezos website. So by all means,
excellent.
Do get in touch if you're interested. So thank you for that little plug, that little commercial break that we managed to crowbar in there. Sorry, mate.
This next one's with Chris Jones, CEO at Space and Time. And we talk all about RFP qualification. What's the approach and how do they think about it? So Chris, over to you. We've talked before about RFP qualification. And I don't need to know again your exact numbers, but broadly, do you apply quite a lot of rigor when an RFP comes in about, is this in our sweet spot? Can we have access to someone to have an open conversation before we start writing, the 100-page document? How does that kind of work? Because I think that's a critical. Agents say to me all the time, my RFP conversion rate's gone down. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you qualify them? Well, the pipeline's a bit thin, so we're bidding for everything. I'm like, well, then your conversion rate will go down because you're bidding for too much.
Yeah.
Only bid for the stuff that you can really win. So how does it work?
100%. So I think that again is multifaceted because I did a talk with the Drum recently.
Oh yeah,
3 or 4 months ago, and I was asked about how are we winning new business? How are we growing that pipeline? How are we converting that pipeline? It was a really broad question. And the thing is, and not to bring the tone down, but I think there is a responsibility from agency leaders and agency owners to manage their workforce effectively because for too long now, I think agencies have thrown resource at, tenuous RFPs and things they kind of know they're probably not going to get. And
exactly.
And we have to look after our staff's mental health. We have to look after people's capacity to do that. And I think the model of just saying, well, it's new business, so we'll stick around until 11 o'clock at night every night, which I've been there, I've done it. And it was, we won lots of new business, I guess, but we lost some as well. And I think that the correlation was that when you're burning the candle at both ends, you don't tend to win very much because it's a direct result of burnout, isn't it? And I think that agencies have a responsibility to manage that effectively. And if you can tangibly, stand up and say, we are at capacity, making sure that the clients we currently look after are delighted to be working with us, then we have no capacity to work on it anyway. Yeah. And so therefore the mindset of, and I know this is true of our new business director and our new business team, is that, although they are motivated to be winning new business, they are absolutely at the forefront thinking, is this right for us? And is it a responsible use of our time? Can we actually do the job here? Because, and I think that's a huge part of our rigor. Now, Mike, is I think in the past, you'd look at a pipeline and you'd say success is having a pipeline that's just full of RFPs.
Right.
And, you sat there, and it's great, right? You sat there in a board meeting and you've got 100 RFPs sat in there and you go, that's awesome. We're not going to have any issue with the second half of our year or the next quarter because we've got all those RFPs in there.
Yeah.
And you think, but the amount of time that needs to go into converting those RFPs, potentially at the detriment to your existing clients, are you going to end up at square one?
Exactly.
And I think that is often overlooked. So, in short, I think that generally speaking, I think we're at about a sort of around the sort of 50% conversion rate on the RFPs that we work on, that we bid for, and I think that's a pretty good conversion rate. Good. And what I would say is that that's significantly higher if we get into a presentation, a face-to-face or a Zoom call, somewhere where we can build rapport.
Yeah.
It's significantly higher than that.
Exactly.
In
fact, I'd say to anyone listening, any agency or anyone that's not in marketing agencies, anyone that's supplying services into large corporates, if you get an RFP and it says you can't talk to anyone until you've written your full response, sent it in, and then we might shortlist you, but it's going to take you, 5 people for 4 weeks. I'd just say, well, we're not bidding. Because how on earth can you get inside the mind of the client, understand the intricacies of their problems, the outcomes they're trying to achieve, and the complexity of the stakeholder group, if you can't talk to anyone? This excerpt's with the amazing Lucas Bergmans. We talk a lot about how when you appoint an agency, not always through an RFP process, but how important it is to maintain the relationship and also focus on the content of a negotiation when you're trying to structure a deal. So Lucas, over to you. When you appointed the agencies that you work with without the long formal pitch process, when you kind of negotiated that kind of commercial structure with them, how important was it, it's a bit of a loaded question, how important was it to maintain the relationship as well as the content of what you were negotiating around the contract? How do you get that balance right? So we haven't prepared this for the audience, so this is just like a kind of, let's see what Lucas' thoughts are on that. But I think it's an important point.
Yeah, look, I think the really important fundamentals, and I think we really lent into this in a way that I probably haven't done in other jobs, is having real transparency and building that kind of relationship from the point of view of, from a foundation of transparency. And where that was particularly prevalent was actually more on the media side. So we appointed good staff. Actually, neither myself or my boss had worked with them before, but it was more by my reputation. We had a couple of meetings with them and we felt that they were actually a really good fit for us. And their real focus as an agency around transparency was a key part of that. They'd also worked with other scale-ups and D2C brands as well, which helped. But it felt there was a kind of really good cultural fit. And the way that we then designed the contracts, I was at that point still pretty much a one-man band in terms of my team, maybe one other person, but certainly what I didn't have is an experienced procurement department, which I might have had at someone like Aviva. So really designing and agreeing a contract from scratch, from first principles, in a way that I probably hadn't really done before. But actually that was really useful because, again, a fresh set of eyes. Why do you need to take, the standard approach that you would have done in other businesses? The approach that we took was actually we actually used the ISBAR. ISBAR do a kind of standard media contract that is very much focused on transparency. So, well, look, let's use that as a starting point. And what that meant, therefore, is that we didn't want the agency to be getting a commission from media owners. We only wanted their funding to come directly from us. And the reason that would be was that they don't have different incentives versus what we have, which is what can happen. So that they're not incentivized by certain media owners to propose different media plans if that's not on strategy.
So that transparency is complete transparency on media costs. So all media costs is basically a pass-through. There's no markup and there's no commissions on that media.
No, exactly. So all their revenue is based on their team's time, and we pay that fee, which ultimately means is that our monthly return is probably higher than it would be. But it also means the kind of benefit to us is that we have complete transparency in terms of kind of what they're incentivized to do, and it's the same as our own incentive, which is to grow the business. So having that level of transparency and trust from the get-go, I think, is really critically important. And actually, that was really useful through the relationship, because what we didn't know was going to happen was there was going to be a global pandemic within the first 3 months of us going live with a very major national campaign, and we had to pull everything, we had to renegotiate everything, which I'm sure a lot of other brands did. But actually, I think the fact that we had built a really good working relationship allowed that to be something that we could navigate pretty well, actually, and come out the back with. Again, we came back while we kind of pulled off air probably the same time as most people, whatever's March, April. We actually came back on air pretty quickly, and we could trade pretty quickly, and we could benefit from pretty cheap pricing for a little while. So having that real kind of solid working relationship, and it's the same on an engine side as well. Just having really open relationship. And, it's certainly in the first year where we had the time, direct access to our founder, direct access to all the people they needed to, really. And so they could really get a feel for the business and feel for what we were all about. And we moved quickly. We didn't really kind of beat around the bush and go through lots of layers of approvals. So I think having that kind of fairly agile, to you coin a phrase, fairly kind of agile way of working, that we could, we didn't have to kind of dwell on things too much, and we had that kind of real culture of moving quickly.
And finally, a discussion with Gareth Turner, all about how, or the reasons why, agencies win or lose client briefs. And Gareth talks about it from the client's perspective, having been a marketing director in some quite big brands. So Gareth, over to you. What's the biggest reasons agencies win and lose client briefs? And what should they do about it, in your experience, as a buyer?
And so, I should sort of say that all this is just one person's view.
Correct.
And so I wouldn't want anyone to change what they do on the back of my ramblings. But
or your brilliant insights rather than ramblings, Gareth. Yeah.
Well, that's very kind of you, Mike. If I think about how I score pitches, there are a number of things, there are a number of sort of sections, and there are loads of little lines in that. But at its best,
and this is in your role as a CMO, head of marketing, head of a brand, in that context.
Yeah. Yes, so I think we'd have briefed in a pitch, right? So we'd have briefed an agent, a number of agencies, hopefully not too many, and I have a scorecard, and in that scorecard, a number of sections. There's probably a section on have they understood the brief?
Yeah.
Have they? And I don't want the brief to be regurgitated verbatim. I just need like one slide just to understand, make sure that you've understood
exactly
what it is we're trying to do. Have they got the right strategy? Is the work okay? Is have they got to the right? A plausible route, and can I work with them? Chemistry,
right?
And the chemistry is a bit of it's an emotive term, but can I see myself working with them? I just need to get a sense that I can work with these people going forward. That there's been some process or plan that's happened in the background that gets us to that work. I'm not that worried about whether the work's right or not, because in essence, a pitch presentation is almost like that first stage creative presentation.
So this is a really important point, I think a really important point, because a lot of agencies will put huge amounts of effort into the creative for the pitch. But what you're saying is, yeah, sure, you need to show up, and you need to show up with your talent, and you need to demonstrate what you can do. But I think, am I right in hearing, you're not looking for the answer, you're looking for, do you have a way of getting to an answer, and have you got the creative chops to impress us even if it might not be the thing that we use in the end.
Yeah.
Is that where you're going?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And because if I in a let's say it wasn't a pitch, it's a brief to an agency, and you get if you're lucky, 2 or 3 stages of creative development. You never get the answer in the first presentation. So why would you expect to get the answer in a pitch?
Correct.
You've got even less chance of getting it in a pitch. But I just need to get a sense that you could do good work. Well, I suppose that's not in doubt, right? Because you're in the mix. But is it plausible? And can we work together to get to work that works for all of us? Yeah, that is maybe slight nuance. Maybe actually they just missed something that you really wanted in the brief, and that's a fault of the brief, by the way. That's not a fault of the agency. If in a perfect world, a brief is a collaboration. That doesn't really work in pitches, and that's the one of the many problems with pitches. And we should remember that no one likes pitches. So it's very well publicised that agencies don't like pitches. Yep, I totally buy that. Brian, we don't like them either. Yeah, it's the drain on resource for agencies and clients. If you think about all the chemistry meetings, the presentations, the tissue meetings, the all this stuff, it's days and days and days. So, and then you've got the emotional challenge of telling someone they haven't won, telling 2 or 3 people they haven't won. Yeah, so that's no one enjoys. It seems glamorous when you're an ABM setting out, right? But it's not glamorous at all. It's hideous.
So there we have it. So I hope you enjoyed listening to this festive episode of Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast. I look forward to hearing about you and engaging with you in the new year as we have more amazing guests lined up for 2025. Thank you. Have a great festive season.